So unfortunately, this video is going to be a bit of a hodgepodge. It started out as me making a video about building the prototype for my custom air cleaner, and that ended up working out so well, I decided to do a video instead of the prototype making a finished version, but then the power supply for the finished version wasn't working so well. So I had to scrap the whole power supply section, and I'm going to add another power supply section at the end of this video, but then I also had another variant of the air cleaner to build, so you're also going to see me building that variant of the air cleaner. So have fun. Managing dust extraction in my little basement workshop is a never-ending challenge. I do have this Wen air filter up here, and as you can see, it does a pretty good job of taking dust out of the air. Out with the old, in with the new. The problem is, since the introduction of the lathe and the radial arm saw, that's just not enough to cover it, so I need more. These units are expensive, $300, $400, $500 each, depending on the make and model. I've tried the box fan with the air filter, the HVAC filter stuck in front of it. It doesn't do great. I've even tried an exhaust fan that I had in my hobby room when my hobby room was upstairs before it started becoming a library. And that doesn't do good either. It's great at exhausting fumes or bringing in fresh air. They're both very good for that. But neither one of them is designed to move large volumes of air against the resistance of a filter. They're just meant to blow air really quickly in large volumes. So I was thinking, obviously, fans exist that can move air against filters. They're used all over the place. And I was thinking, well, maybe I can just Google what type of fan is good for that. And then I had an idea. Hey, come on in, pull up a seat. If you're new here, my name is Dan, and if you're not, you already knew that. So I was thinking about different types of fans, and it occurred to me I already know of a fan that can move air against a bit of resistance, and that is a computer case fan. These are designed to pump air from inside the case out. They're removing heat from inside the case. So they're trying to draw air in against the tiny air holes that are in the case, so they can move air. They're really inexpensive. I paid like 28 bucks for 5 of these, so like $6 a piece. They run on really low voltage. They're speed controllable, so you can raise and lower the speed. So what I'm going to do is, for my prototype, I'm going to use some pine. I've got 2x4s. I'm going to cut them down to 1x1 rails. I'm going to build a couple of boxes. You'll see, it'll be like a long rectangle box. And for the prototype, I'm going to skin it just in poster board, this foam core board that you use for like science fairs and stuff. It's super inexpensive. Honestly, I was thinking if it works, then I can pull that off and replace the skin with plywood, like 1/4-inch thick plywood, but why bother? I can just leave that on there. It'll work just as well. So I'm going to take you through me building this. I don't know if it's going to work or not work, but let's make a prototype together, okay?
Hey everyone, this was originally going to be a video where I was going to show building the prototype for this air cleaner, but it was working so well, as you can see from this little clip here, that I'm just going straight into recording about building the final project.
Materials needs are pretty straightforward. You need some poster board, you need some PC case fans, you need a minimally 12-volt power brick. This one is really handy because you can actually change the voltage on it, so you can change your fan speed that way, and you need half a 2x4. As far as supplies, you're going to need some duct tape, obviously some wood glue. For this build, we're going to be using silicone RTV to seal up the panels. You're going to need some machine screws, nuts, bolts, washers to attach the fans to the face of the unit. And if you want to be able to hang it, you're going to need some little eye hooks and some picture hanging wire.
Okay, the first thing you need to do is rip your 2x4s down to the appropriate widths. Now for this project, and in the plans, I'm using 1/2 inch squared pieces of the 2x4. You can use 3/4 or whatever size works for you. I went with 1/2 to make something that was really light and really easy to work with. If you want to use S4S lumber instead of ripping down a 2x4, you can do that as well. Again, you just have to adjust your sizes a little bit. All right, and after you've cut your framing pieces to the right length, you just need to cut half flaps in them. For this build, obviously, since they're 1/2 inch square, I'm going to make 1/4 by 1/4 half flaps. And I decided to do that with my table saw sled. All right, now what you're going to do is you're going to glue up 2 pieces of the frame. And now I decided to make these the facing frame. I think that's the best way to do it. So it'll be the front and back of the air cleaning unit. So one side is going to have the fans on it, and the other side is going to have the filter on it. A little bit of white glue and some squeeze clamps, and you get this done. And I also decided to use my square blocks just to make sure the whole assembly was nice and square. All right, and now we're going to get on to actually building the front face. So this is the piece that is going to have the fans mounted in it. I decided to go just with foam core board for this, even though I could have used plywood or MDF or some other material. The foam core is inexpensive, easy to work with, nice and light, and it is actually plenty strong enough for this application. I want to make sure there's an airtight seal, a reasonably airtight seal between the foam core boards and the framing pieces, because we want the air to be moving through the filter and not through gaps in the case. So here I'm using a little bit of RTV silicone. This stuff is really inexpensive. You can find it everywhere, like Walmart and stuff. Basically, I'm using that as a gap filler, and then I am going to use my electric stapler here and staple the foam core to the frame. That will hold it in place while the RTV seals, while the RTV cures, so I don't have to sit and wait for it. You could just use a regular construction stapler or a brad nailer or whatever you have in hand. I think staples are probably better than nails here because you're going to get a better more secure attachment of the foam core. All right, after you've got the front piece on your framing there, you need to start working on mounting your fans. And you really could, if you wanted to, measure it out really carefully, but I didn't feel any need to, so I'm just kind of placing them in an arrangement that I think looks good, making sure there's enough space all the way around them, and then you're just marking their position with pencil. All right, and now to mount them, since the fans have the corner cutoffs for the holes with the bolts, I just marked quick little corner cutoffs on these. And then I'm just going to take my handy utility knife and cut out those shapes. And here I'm just using a center punch to mark where the holes are going to be to drill through. Obviously, a drill feels like a little bit overkill here, but it's the easiest way to punch holes in this. So now I'm just taking the drill and popping holes in the frame. And we're just going to mount the fans with some machine screws and fender washers. I went with washers on this just because the nuts are really small and they're going to pull pretty easily through that poster board. And a little bit of a washer in there keeps it nice and sturdy. One of the really handy things about using these computer fans is that they are designed to be daisy chained. So you can see you can just plug one fan into the next fan and then another fan into that fan. And then you only have to make one actual electrical connection.
All right, let's talk about how to power this thing. So initially I was hoping to be able to use one of these little 12-volt wall warts. And while they do put out the correct amount of voltage, they can't handle the load that these fans need. So that's no good. So what's my other choice? Well, a computer power supply unit, PSU. This looks like a big nightmare, but it's really not. It's pretty simple, actually. What you're going to have to do, you have to run a jumper right there between those two lines. Now, if you happen to get one that's color-coded, it's a green and a black wire right there. If not, You see those two that I have jumpered right there? Just jumper those two. Without jumpering that, the unit won't turn on. And these are not expensive. I got this one for like 10 bucks off eBay. I'm sure you can find them on Marketplace or Craigslist or whatever. You can find an old busted computer where everything else isn't working, but the power supply still works. Maybe you have one kicking around at home. That's fine. So the first thing you need to do, like I said, is jumper those two lines. If I can find my lines again, yeah. So that sends the signal to the power supply unit that the computer is turned on, so it will power up. It won't power up without that. Other than that, you just need to track down a couple of wires that are running 12 volt and ground. It's really helpful if you have a multimeter to do this. But it's not all that hard, and then you wire them together, and I like using these little heat crimps here. Just slide a wire in each end and then put some heat on it, and they'll melt. And that's really all you have to do to wire this thing up. If you connect the wrong wires on the fans, don't worry about that. Nothing will happen except that the fans won't turn on. You just have to flip the positive and the ground until you get the fan to turn on. And you can find wiring diagrams for these. I'll try and stick one in here and maybe a link to it down below. So that's my best solution for a power supply to power your homemade fan unit. Any power supply for a computer can easily handle the current these fans need. Running a PCU or a GPU is going to take crap loads more power than these fans will even ever need. So if you can only find like an older used power supply that's really low wattage or something like that, grab it. It'll be just fine for this application.
And then we're just going to use a little bit of duct tape to secure them to the foam core board, just to keep it all nice and tidy. All right, and now we're going on with the glue up of the two frame pieces together. And look, I'm not going to lie, this is a challenge. So the way I went about this is I have these long clamps. I did two pieces. Actually, I clamped the first piece in place without gluing it. It's just a dry clamp. And then I glued the diagonal one to that. And that got the frame to hold in position, so then I could glue in the opposite corners, and then finally, of course, go all the way around and glue back to the other two corners that I had just dry glued in place. So I'm not sure I have any really good advice about how to make this easier. I suppose you could drill little holes in everything and use screws to hold it together. I decided to just go with glue, which is sufficiently strong. But using pieces this small, it's also kind of fragile until you've got the sides on. It's very susceptible to racking forces. And of course, just for good measure, I'm adding my angle brackets in there, clamping that all up to make sure everything is nice and square. All right, and now that the frame is all glued up, we're going to go to skinning it. And what I'm doing here is I'm using a yardstick to measure out about an inch or maybe an inch and a quarter past the edge of the frame. This is the side that the filter is going to go on, and this little inch overhang works to kind of hold the filter in place. And the pull of the fans is more than enough to keep that filter locked into place. But if you want to add a little extra securing devices, you can do that, or even just touching up against the foam core board is enough to hold it in place. And one of the things I do want to mention is that you need to be really careful when rotating this frame around until you have the entire set of skins on, especially if you use the 1/2 inch wide pieces like I used here. Because like I said, it is very susceptible to racking forces. I actually had this crack apart on me while I was trying to put it together the first time. So I had to re-glue it and then just be a lot more careful about how I was moving around while I was skinning it. But all the skins are done the same way as the one I showed you with the fans. We do a ring of silicone around them and then staple gun to anchor them in place. And that really is all there is to it. You can see I've got my fans plugged in there to my power brick as I stand right in front of the camera. Here's the filter, and you can see how it slots in here nice and easily. I did mess up my cutting on the foam core a little bit, so I didn't have the top and bottom supports for the fan, but the side is enough, and you can see the pull of the fans is just sucking that filter right into place. And there it is. That's the finished fan product. As you can see, I'm getting plenty of motion from the fan side of that. I put little papers on there so you could see. And you can actually even see that filter is bowed in a little bit from the force of the air that's being pulled through. So, all right, and here's the build video for the second configuration that I made. This is one, as you'll see in the pictures, is going to be mounted over my lathe. I'm just going to let this roll and throw a little music on top of it, so enjoy.